Famous Dr. Breus, who is one of the world's experts on sleep. Super happy to have you here. We've had a lot of conversations on sleep.
Yes, we have.
It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, and I can't wait to talk to you more about it. And you've got such an immense knowledge on sleep from your history in this world. I mean, you've been on Dr. Oz, you've been on the Doctor Show,
Yes.
like hundreds of times. It's incredible.
Not quite hundreds, but it's close.
Look, I think combined you've been on TV
Yeah,
hundreds of times,
absolutely.
for sure. And I know you consult for many big companies on sleep. It's just incredible, all the stuff that you do. And I think before we launch into sleep, I want to get to know you. I want the audience to get to know you a little bit better.
Of course.
Because you're such an interesting person. Tell us a little bit about your history and how you got to where you are.
Sure. So here's the thing is you don't grow up saying, hey, I want to be a sleep doctor, right? Like that just didn't happen when I was growing up. Believe it or not, there really weren't that many sleep doctors when I was growing up. If you had a sleep problem, you usually went to a psychiatrist and they prescribed you a sleep aid, and that was that. And it was actually kind of serendipitous. I wasn't planning on being a sleep doctor. So to give everybody my background, I have a Ph.D. in clinical psychology, but I happen to also be board certified in clinical sleep disorders. So I actually took the medical specialty board without going to medical school and passed. There was a short time period where you were allowed to do that. And so I've been an actively practicing sleep specialist for the last 19 years. But the weird part was in graduate school. So I'm in graduate school, picture you're in graduate school, you're trying to get your, PhD done, you're taking classes, you're teaching, just no time for sleep for sure, right? And I finally get to the point where I'm on my residency. And so they said, hey, we've got lots of rotations for the residency. And they said, do you want to do the sleep rotation? And I was like, that sounds kind of cool, right? I mean, I worked my way through graduate school as an electrophysiology tech. So I know how to take all those machines that measure any signal from your body and take them apart, pull them back together. And they use the same machines for sleep. So I understood why they wanted me, because I was easy to train, because I already knew all this stuff. I was just kind of curious to see what happened. I figured, well, I'll do a rotation. How bad could it be? I sleep, right? How tough could this be? So I go in, and literally by the third day, I absolutely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine. Here's the thing is I help people that fast. It's unbelievable. I mean, you change somebody's sleep, you change their life, right? I mean, it's very quick. It's quicker than I expected it could be. I mean, there are cases where literally in 24 hours, I change people's lives. And it's so bizarre to be able to be in that position, especially as a psychologist, because in many cases, we don't see treatment gains for weeks, months, even years at times. And, I just zoom in on the sleep, get it done, and get people feeling better.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you do. I mean, even just a few tidbits of information you've shared with me has helped my sleep patterns.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's been great for me personally. So let's dive into the science a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of people get confused on this, and I've explained to a lot of patients as well. And why it's important. There's different sleep stages.
Correct.
And they each do different types of physiological reactions in your body. Can you go through that a little bit with us?
Of course. So first of all, what's kind of interesting here is there's two distinct systems in the brain for sleep. One is a sleep drive, a lot like hunger, right? So I'm hungry. I eat something, and then that hunger dissipates. The same holds true with sleep. So when your cells are wandering around and they see a piece of glucose and they eat it, something comes out the back end when they're done. One of those things is stuff called adenosine. Adenosine works its way through your system and goes to a very specific receptor site in your brain. And as that adenosine piles up, you get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. Just as a side note, because I'm kind of a geek about these things, if you look at the molecular structure of adenosine and the molecular structure of caffeine, they're off by one molecule. Right? So caffeine fits perfectly into that receptor site. Right? But back to sleep drive. So that's how sleep drive works, is this buildup of adenosine. But there's a second system called your circadian rhythm, your internal biological clock, right? And so you know how you kind of get hungry around breakfast time, around lunchtime, around dinner time? Same holds true with sleep, is most people get sleepy roughly between 10 and 11 o'clock at night. So when your circadian rhythm is in sync and your sleep drive is high, you sleep. Right? But if either one of those systems is off, that's when you have a sleep disorder.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
When you say sleep drive, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? Is that kind of like your sleep bank? to an extent, or
it's really almost identical to hunger. It's like, you know, that feeling you get where you're a little bit hungry and then you get hungrier and hungrier and hungrier, and then you're like so hungry you could eat like the table. That's the exact same thing that happens with sleep. Is it's literally this buildup of adenosine that goes for
Got it. So it's building up over time. The longer you don't have it, the more that you need it.
Exactly, which is one of the reasons why if you nap too late in the afternoon, it's hard to fall asleep. Right? It's also another reason why I tell my insomnia patients never nap. Because we want sleep drive, and then we want their sleep drive to be as high as humanly possible, because then they'll fall asleep much easier when I'm doing different behavioral techniques and things like that to work with them. But you asked me a specific question which had to do with sleep stages and sleep cycles. So let's break that down just a little bit right now. So it turns out that you go from wake to stage 1 to stage 2, down into stage 3, 4, back to stage 2, and then into REM sleep. That little dance maneuver that you do, and it's very specific, you do it in that order in particular, takes about 90 minutes or so. So that's considered a sleep cycle, okay? Average person has 5 sleep cycles. But here's what gets interesting, is the amount of each stage varies based on which cycle you're in. So in the front part of the night, or the first third of the night, you have more stage 3, 4 sleep. And in the back third of the night, you have more REM sleep. Michael, why on earth is this important? I'll tell you why. Physical restoration occurs stage 3, 4 sleep. So Mother Nature knew what she was doing when she created this whole thing, right? Because we become physically restored first. So that way, if God forbid there's an emergency, we can hop up and our body can actually move and go around. We might not be too mentally there, but we'll definitely get there on the physical side. If we keep going throughout the night, we get more REM sleep. That's the mentally restorative sleep. It's pretty interesting. The data is now very clear. We now learn that we actually move information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory during REM sleep. This becomes incredibly important because our brain creates an organizational substructure to deposit information so that way we can retrieve it when somebody asks us a question or we have to make a decision or something like that. And here's where it gets really interesting, is when pieces of information are kind of layered into the brain, they connect electrically. We think that connection is our dreams. So if you've ever wondered why you walk in your dream, you walk into the kitchen and your 3rd grade teacher is eating a bowl of spaghetti and meatballs with a donkey, it's because pieces of information kind of clicked in a weird way, and that's the representation that it has in your head, right? So it's pretty bizarre, but that's kind of the basics of sleep and how sleeps work, with the 2 processes, the different stages, and then the across the night, the cycles.
So the people that are not sleeping 8 hours, for example, they might feel physically restored, but they're not getting that mental restorative sleep as much that you get at the end of the night.
Well, maybe. So I'm gonna challenge you on one thing, which is 8 hours. Okay. 8 hours is a myth. Okay. Not everybody needs 8 hours, and I'm sure lots of people out there are like, phew, I'm glad that I don't have to do that, right? I'm a 6.5 hour sleeper, right? It turns out that my sleep cycles aren't as long as 90 minutes. It turns out that they're about 83 minutes. Okay, how did I know that? I work in a sleep lab, guys, so it's not too hard for me to figure this stuff out. But there's ways that you can track that. But different people have different lengths of their cycles, and that can change the amount of sleep they need. However, your assumption was correct, is if you needed 8 hours and you didn't get it, what you're missing is the REM sleep at the back end of the night, and that's where memory problems come from. And so one of the first questions that I ask my patients is, do you forget your keys a lot? Like, do you walk into a room and forget why you're there? Or can you not remember everything on the grocery list when you're in the store? That's a lack of REM sleep.
That's really interesting. So what you just said, like, you're an 83-minute sleep cycle.
Correct.
Can people actually go to your sleep lab, figure out their sleep cycles and how much time they're spending in it, and kind of optimize the amount of time and get to know the amount of time is optimized for them?
Absolutely. But here's what's cool about it, is you don't even have to go to a sleep lab to do it. You can actually do it with a sleep tracker. So you've seen many of the trackers that are available, the wrist trackers, or stuff under the bed or stuff beside the bed. And there are pros and cons to different ones. There's certain ones that I have favorites of versus others. But you can actually start to track your sleep cycle if you know what you're looking for with these trackers. And then over the course of time, there's some good information you can get from that. Like, so for example, I'm a 50-year-old male. I might want to look at my sleep compared to other 50-year-old males to see what that kind of does. Also, if it's not on par, there are very few trackers, but there are a couple that will actually give you information to help increase the areas that you have deficits in. Now, sometimes that could require supplementation. Sometimes that could require different scheduling. There's a whole host of different things that we can do.
And does it relate like that? Like, does your cycles change over time? So as a 50-year-old male, your needs are going to change from me being 34 years old?
Right. Oh, no, but I wish I could sleep like a 34-year-old dude. That would be amazing, right? So as a 50-year-old male, a couple of things start to happen right around this time. Between age 50 and 55, the first thing we start to see is a degradation in melatonin production. So for folks out there who may or may not know, melatonin is kind of that key that starts the engine for sleep. You got to have it on board. Your brain produces it, fortunately. But when you hit around age 50, 55, you start to see a lower.
It's all downhill from there.
It's all downhill from there.
Like everything.
Right. Absolutely. Also,
until you come to Next Health.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, and then the other thing that you see is a decrease in the amplitude or the power of the waveforms for deep sleep, which means you're not getting as much of that physical restoration. Which actually, I know you guys were joking when you said it, but that's exactly the reason to come to Next Health. Because if you're starting to fade on all of these areas as you're getting older, then doing I'm a testament to it myself. I'm doing it right now. I've done the blood work. I'm learning more about my hormone profile. I'm doing changing things in here. And it's actually having some really interesting effects and some good effects.
So on that note, you think optimizing your hormones, you've seen the effect of optimizing hormones impacting sleep.
Dude, I'm living it right now. Like, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I got involved with Next Health because I like the staff. I like working with Dr. Shaw, but also I like the people who are coming through the door who are like, I want to prevent stuff. I don't want to get to that space where, if my body was a car, I don't want to cross the finish line, with 4 blown tires, and, smoke coming out, right? I want to be the Lambo that goes flying across it, and at top speed, but in shape. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's one of the things that Next Health does.
That's a great analogy for us. We should use that.
We'll steal that.
Fair enough.
So that's interesting. So, what I've seen, like I always say sleep is one of the 3 pillars of health. And unless you get your sleep right, like working on your nutrition, working on your exercise, it's hard to get any of that right.
Well, and not only that is it's less effective, right? So I can show you data, convincing data. I mean, we're talking 20, 30 studies that show that when you're not sleeping, your body does not metabolize well, which means you either keep weight or you gain weight, right? I mean, I know that's a struggle for lots of people, especially as we get older. I mean, I'm one to tell you there's nothing easy about losing weight at age 50, right? But if you're sleeping well, your body's metabolism is moving the way it should, and it's much easier to do a lot of those things. It's actually pretty fascinating. I mean, if you want to get into the details, I can go further.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to hear more about sleep and sugar metabolism specifically, because that's something that I talk to a lot of patients about as well. As their hemoglobin A1C is going up, their fasting blood sugar is going up, and the first question I ask them is, "Are you sleeping?" And like, dude, epidemic of diabetes in America.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's going to crush the healthcare system.
It is going to crush.
No question.
Exactly.
No question. It's going to.
The solution is like, part of it's kind of simple. Get some sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at it and we dive a little deeper into how sleep affects the metabolic system, it's actually quite fascinating. Again, over 30 studies now to show out of multiple universities, a couple of big things happen. So number one, when we're sleep deprived, our metabolism slows down. Okay. Why does it do that? It's trying to conserve the resources. Your brain is saying, why the heck am I up? Right? I got to keep the fuel in my system, so I'm going to burn it at a lower pace, not a higher pace, to keep my fuel going because I'm not sure why I'm awake. That's number one. The second thing that happens is our cortisol levels increase and our appetite increases. Right? Why? To get resources. We're trying to tell our brain, hey, go find some fuel to get, because you're up and you're not supposed to be, but you're going to need fuel because this whole system doesn't work without it. Right? So you've got low metabolism and high appetite. Right there, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, but it gets much worse. So we see hormonal changes. 2 big hormones are leptin and ghrelin. So ghrelin, which is spelled G-H-R-E-L-I-N, and I think of it as the go hormone because it starts with G. It's the thing that makes us hungry. There's a difference between having appetite and actually being hungry, metabolically speaking, and this ghrelin increases by over 20% when we're sleep deprived. Leptin is the satiety hormone, meaning it tells us when we're full. That decreases by 15%. So hold on, Michael. So cortisol is up, so I've got high appetite. Ghrelin is up, so I've got high hunger. Leptin is down, so I don't feel full, and my metabolism is slow. Could it get any worse than that? Oh, yes, it can. There's one more thing. So here's what's really amazing. Great study, University of Chicago showed that our snacking preferences when we're sleep deprived. So what happens when you guys are sleep deprived? What do you reach for?
Yes.
Something not healthy.
Something not healthy. Cookies, cakes, pies, whatever, right? It's really interesting. So because of those elevated levels of cortisol, our brain doesn't like to have elevated levels of cortisol. So we reach for high-fat, high-caloric foods because it increases serotonin in our brain to calm us down. They call them comfort foods for a reason, right? Mac and cheese makes you feel good. And the reason it does is because these high carbohydrates cause this release of serotonin, which helps quiet that cortisol. So it's literally the perfect storm. The more sleep deprived you are, I can guarantee you cannot lose weight and you will start to gain weight over time. I've seen it in dozens of patients.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then what about sleep and let's talk about Alzheimer's and
Okay.
specifically like, brain fog, Alzheimer's, that entire continuum of brain disease. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So, and that's not my area of specialty, but I can definitely talk about it. So when we look at all of those neurocognitive decline type of situations, every one of them is specifically affected by sleep, right? Because remember, a lot of people are shortening their sleep or not getting good deep sleep, so they're not getting the REM, they're not getting the stage 3, 4, and so their memory starts to fade, right? What's one of the first signs or signals of Alzheimer's or dementia? Memory problems, right? I can't count the number of patients who came in and said, hey, Dr. Breus, I'm pretty sure I've got dementia. And I'm like, well, how much are you sleeping? They go, 4 hours a night. I'm like, you don't have dementia. Hold on, right? We get them sleeping better. And all of a sudden they're like, holy cow, I'm fine. Yeah. So there's a lot. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you think you got dementia, talk to your doctor, right? And have the testing done. Right. But at the end of the day, or Alzheimer's or what have you, but at the end of the day, sleep has a dramatic effect on our cognition, the speed of our cognition, our ability to remember things, and our ability to make decisions. Great study out of the University of Las Vegas, of all places, looked at risky decision making. Surprise, surprise, right? And what they discovered was the more sleep deprived you are, it's not that you don't know that the odds are against you, you don't care, right? They love that in Las Vegas, clearly, but we don't like that when it comes to our health.
Exactly. You have a question?
I was going to say, so what is the optimal sleep that someone's supposed to get? Or when you hear so often, I get 4 or 5 hours and I'm good. That's all I need. Are there really some people that are good on 4 or 5 hours? Or are they just,
Okay. So I get this question constantly. So you actually asked me 2 questions. One is, are there such things as people who can survive on 4 hours? And then what is optimal sleep for most people? So I'm going to answer the first one first, or the second one first. So believe it or not, 1/10 of 1% of people are what we call short sleepers. These are people who actually can survive quite well on 4 to 4.5 hours of sleep. It's kind of like they hit the genetic lottery for sleep, if you will. But the truth of the matter is I've met a couple of the people who actually claim to be short sleepers, and we figured out in the lab that they were. They're not as happy as you might think. Okay, they're up for 19 hours a day, right? Like there's only so much television you can watch, books you can read. And by the way, everybody that you care about is asleep for 6, 7, 8 hours a day while you're up and wandering around the halls and things like that. So there are people like that. Most of them, to be honest with you, are either super driven, like type A, running 12 companies types of people, or they're actually depressed because there's so much loneliness that comes with it.
And this small group of people can literally be in optimal health, sleeping 4 hours a night.
They can. Their bodies have genetically been able to handle that. And we actually now have seen the gene splicing. There's actually this particular splice of gene that's been identified that you can identify with blood work. I mean, 23andMe one day will probably have something like that.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the genetics of sleeping, just because you hit on it real quick, it's really interesting because
fascinating.
I loved your last book where you talk about the 4 different kinds of sleepers and the genetics behind that. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. So what you're talking about, so remember in the first part of our conversation when we were talking about sleep rhythm, first we were talking about drive, the second we were talking about rhythm. So rhythm is our circadian rhythm. So genetically speaking, what's really interesting is the period 3 gene, or the PER3 gene. That particular allele is very, very interesting. The length of it actually determines how long we sleep, and then the width of it actually determines the timing of that sleep. And it turns out, so you've probably never heard of the word, but they're called chronotypes. Okay, but you actually have heard of chronotypes before. If you've ever heard of somebody being called an early bird or a night owl, those are chronotypes. Okay, so what I did, originally the discovery was made back in the 70s that there were early birds, genetically speaking, and there were night owls, genetically speaking. Then around the 80s or 90s, somebody came up with the idea that there's somebody in between called the hummingbird. Okay, it's all about birds apparently. And then my book came out, and what I was really interested in was the sleepless bird. Right? Because my whole career has been spent looking at people with insomnia. And I can actually show you there's genetics on insomnia. There are people who genetically are just not good sleepers, right? So then what I decided to do was, if people knew this information about themselves, then they could actually plan their days in a very effective and efficient way. So I don't like birds. I mean, not that I don't like birds, but I'm a mammal, right? So I wanted to pick mammals. So I renamed the category. So an early bird is now a lion. And I chose lions because lions actually are early risers. Their first kill is usually just before dawn, and then they get super lazy in the afternoon. But my lions, from a personality standpoint, these are my COOs of the company. These are my type A's. They make a list every day, and they go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. They're very kind of militant in their thought process. They're great leaders. They're not necessarily good at getting work done per se, but they're really good at management and having great vision and kind of helping people get there. The middle group are what we call our hummingbirds. I call them bears. And it's, by the way, 50% of people are bears. 50%. Only about 15% are lions. It's actually best to be a bear. And I'll tell you why. It's because the entire world is built on a bear schedule. 9 to 5 is a bear's schedule. That's how bears function. And bears are great. Bears are the people who get the work done. They're usually extroverted individuals. These are the folks that are, like, hey, come on over and join us for lunch, or hey, I'll buy you a beer at the bar. That kind of person. They're usually pretty outgoing, but again, hard workers, great friends, good people to have in your company. Next come the night owls, or what I call the wolves. Okay, now wolves are extremely nocturnal creatures. They usually kill in the middle of the night, and so they actually follow the same schedule. I happen to be a wolf. So I have been my entire life, ever since I was a teenager. And by the way, almost all teenagers like to stay up late and sleep late, but some of them grow out of it. I did not. And so I never go to bed before midnight, ever. It's just not part of my whole system. It just doesn't work well for me. And if I could, I would sleep until 8, 9 o'clock on some days if I really had it in me to do so. But again, I only need about 6.5 hours of sleep. So I go to bed at midnight. I wake up between 6:30 and 7 without a clock every day. The fourth category are dolphins, which are my problem sleepers. I actually use dolphins. Most people don't know it, but dolphins actually sleep unihemispherically. So half of their brain is asleep while the other half is awake and looking for predators. And I thought this was a good representation of my insomniacs who are never quite asleep, right? And so, okay, Michael, you got these 4 categories. That's kind of cool. What can we do with that? So once you figure out what your type is, and you can go to my website and take a free quiz and learn, or buy the book and do that.
I can tell you right now, I'm a lion. I mean, no, you're a lion.
Yeah.
He's a wolf.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's probably why you guys really work well together, is because you do things at one time, you do things at another, and you can kind of cover it all together.
But it's a bear's world, and we're all just living in it.
Exactly. So here's what gets interesting, right, is when I look at your hormones, because hormones are very predictable, right? And so if you're a lion, let's say that Darshan's a lion, okay, and he wakes up at 5:30 in the morning, his melatonin stops, his cortisol increases, and all of his hormones start their day on their daily routine, right? This ebb and flow that kind of goes throughout a 24-hour cycle. But you're a wolf, right? And so you don't wake up at 5:30 who wakes up at 5:30 in the morning, right? You wake up at 7:30 or 8 o'clock if you can. And that's right. And that's when your melatonin shuts off and then your hormones go. Well, now let's change the situation a little bit. Let's say that you are living with somebody who's a lion and the other person is a wolf. Well, guess what? Your schedules are like 2.5 hours off.
Don't they begin to connect though?
No.
Or it's just a constant battle?
That's the problem. Exactly. It's a constant battle. Right. And so here's where it gets really interesting, is what I decided to do was map 50 different activities that you do during the day. And I said, well, there has to be times during the day when your hormones are naturally at a particular peak that can be helpful for this particular activity. And so I actually figured out the best time to have sex, eat a cheeseburger, ask your boss for a raise, run a mile, you name it. All based on your hormones, based on chronotypes.
Where can someone find this list?
Buy the book.
Exactly.
Buy the book. I got one over here. Hold on. Here we
That's
go.
great.
The Power of When. Here, we'll put it right.
Now, explain that a little bit more. You're saying for each type of person, you find out the optimal time per day that they have, that this is like their peak moment of the day?
So their peak moment for doing particular things. So people always ask the question, so let's talk about sex, right? So what's the peak time to have sex? So it's kind of interesting when you think about it. When you look at sex as a biomechanical act, there are certain hormones that you're going to need, right? You need cortisol, you need estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and adrenaline to be high, and you need melatonin to be low, right? 75% of people have sex between 10:30 and 11:30 at night. I'll give you one guess what their hormone profile looks like.
It's the opposite.
It's the opposite.
The morning is the time to go.
Exactly. And here's where we have even more proof of it. Most men wake up with an erection. If that's not Mother Nature saying this is the time to do that, I don't know what is. Right?
Exactly.
So so here's where it gets really interesting is what happens if you're a lion but your partner is a wolf? How does something like that work, right? So I actually created a matrix in the book where I give people, so you can plot it along one side and say, okay, male here, female here, and I've also got matrices for homosexual couples as well, so gay and lesbian couples, because the hormones are different, right? And so I've actually figured it all. It's really pretty fun.
That's amazing. So you went from sleep doctor to relationship specialist, all in one book.
I got to tell you this: I've saved more relationships as a sleep doctor than I think I ever would have as a marital therapist, just by getting people back in bed together, sleeping together. It's pretty cool.
Speaking of relationships, what do you feel about cuddling?
With you in particular?
Well, you're a big here.
Cuddling is great because of the release of oxytocin. Right, the love hormone, and so there's a lot of good that can certainly come from that. Did you have a specific question?
Well, I mean, just personally, I'm a big cuddler. Unlike most guys, or most won't admit it, but I love to cuddle.
Yeah, no,
it becomes a hazard sleeping sometimes. Cuddling, and I was just thinking, scientifically, what are the thoughts on kind of sleep hygiene with cuddling?
Sure. So here's the bottom line is some people don't mind having other people on them and some people are like, get away. So I always recommend for couples to have a queen size bed or larger. Because if you want your space, you want your space, right? The other thing is temperature turns out to be a big deal, right? So I generate a tremendous amount of heat from my body, or so my wife tells me. And so she doesn't necessarily want me to be too close to her because she also generates heat. And so all of a sudden, she's uncomfortable. So we might cuddle before and then kind of move over to our sides. I also have to tell you though, in my bed, there's me, the French Bulldog, the Chihuahua, my wife, and the cat. So it's quite a grouping.
It's a cuddle puddle.
It is, exactly.
Yeah, I find it really interesting. Like, the best way for me to sleep is at 68 degrees. I have my temperature turned down all the way.
Actually the correct temperature.
Right, but my wife is
68 to
different.
72.
She feels like it's freezing, and a lot of people are uncomfortable. Some people are uncomfortable sleeping in that, and when I recommend that to a lot of patients who are not sleeping, it changes their life. Literally, they fall asleep so much faster.
Absolutely.
Are there people that need different temperatures when they're sleeping, or is it pretty universal that 68 degrees is the right one?
So I'd love it if we could just say 68 to 72 degrees, that's what everybody should do. But there are different preferences in different people, really based on vascularity, right? And so how much adipose tissue do you have? How much, right? And so what is your blood circulation? Like if you've got Raynaud's, you don't want the room to be 68 degrees. You'll freeze if the room is 68 degrees, right? So certain circulatory issues might change that. The amount of weight that you actually have could change that. I know people who are a little bit bigger, they don't like it warm because they get very uncomfortable. People who are smaller don't have as much insulation, right? And so they might like it a little bit warmer. Believe it or not, they now make products that you can put in your bed that can either cool, like an electric blanket, but it's cooling.
Sure.
The chili pad, right. So there's cooling and then there's heating, and you can change that as you need it based on what season it is or what's kind of going on with you. Also your core body temperature, right? So if you worked out late in the evening, you don't want to get into a super toasty bed. You want to get into bed with cool, crisp sheets. You want your feet sticking out so that you can get a little breeze going and you can stay cool and fall asleep.
Yeah.
Temperature is a big deal. Remember, the sleep cycle follows the core body temperature cycle. almost directly. So you want to kind of stay with it. And the core body temperature cycle, right around 10:30, hits a peak and then drops. That drop is actually a signal to the brain to release melatonin, and that's what kicks off the whole cycle.
So one thing I want to talk more about sleep hygiene, because I think this is a fascinating topic. And for people who are listening that don't know what sleep hygiene is basically the environment you surround yourself with in your sleep routine. And you in your career have designed many beds. And to have a sleep doctor designing a bed, I mean, who else? That's the perfect person designing a bed for you. So what does one look for in the best bed that you can buy?
Now this is a hard one. This is tough. I'm actually working on a project right now to figure out what would the ultimate mattress showroom look like, right? Like how many beds do you really need? Because it drives me nuts. You go in there, there's 40 rectangles. They all look the same, right? I mean, there's a couple ribbons there, a couple colors there, but they all, I mean, who knows what's going on inside of these things? So there's a couple things. So first of all, there is a lot of personal preference that goes on here. There's a couple of factors that you need to think about. So when you look at a mattress, there's what's called a support layer, which is the biggest, thickest part, usually the first 8 inches from the bottom up. And then there's a comfort layer, which kind of comes on top. The comfort layer will be layered with different types of materials, usually some type of foam or latex. The support layer can be springs, it can be foam, it can be air, it can be water, it can be all kinds of things. But that really represents kind of the firmness, if you will, and the support of the spine. The biggest thing that people have to remember is the mattress is really there to create an environment that's supportive of the physical frame. Number one, for safety, but number two, so that it's not in any form of jeopardy, right? So you're not twisted a weird way, you're not kind of leaning all the way back, but you're kind of in more of a neutral position. And why that's good is because all the musculature that attaches to the spine, you want it to release when you're sleeping, because if you're in a weird position, it can stay tight and then you end up with back pain and cramps and all these kind of things. So getting back to the mattresses, you want to have a really good support layer, and then from a comfort layer, it becomes more personal preference. So I have a tried and true method, and here's what I have all of my patients do, is narrow it down to about 3 different types of beds. Then go to the store, go online, read the reviews, kind of see what people like you are looking for. And then when you show up, don't show up at 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, show up at 6 o'clock at night in sweatpants and a sweatshirt with your pillow under your arm and flip-flops on, okay? I do this. People look at me like I'm crazy, but I promise you it works, right? Because you want to get as close to what your bed clothes would be like, and you want it to be at the end of the day when your body is swollen, tired, right? Because testing out a bed at 10 o'clock in the morning is not going to tell you whether or not you can sleep really well, okay? Much better to do in the evening, just based on what happens to your body during the day. Next thing you do is you turn to the salesperson, you say, where are the 3 mattresses that I'm looking for? And they'll tell you, and then say, do me a favor, dude, leave me alone, right? I want you to go over there to the other side. I promise you I'll buy the bed from you if I'm going to buy a bed today, but I want to have the time and space because I can't stand when they're like, how does it feel? How does it feel? Right? It drives you nuts, right? And so then getting to your starting sleep position, right? So if you've got a pillow between your legs and one under your head and one on your arm and you're hugging it, I don't care what you normally do it in the store, okay? And lie there for a good 5 minutes, okay? There's no way that you can bounce your butt on the end of a mattress and tell if it's a good mattress, okay? It doesn't work that way, right? And it also doesn't work if you only lie there for 30 seconds. You really have to allow your body to adjust and feel the bed. It takes a good 4 or 5 minutes. Then rotate to another side and lie there for 4 or 5 minutes. And then on your phone or bring a pad and a pencil, write a rating of the bed, right? And so, and by the way, your bed partner should be right next to you doing the same thing, but doesn't share the rating.
Right.
Then go to the next bed and then the next bed, okay? By doing that and then compare notes with your bed partner. You will be surprised, but you will more than likely come together on something. And if you don't, that's an indication that there's a different type of mattress that you might want, one that has a tremendous amount of flexibility in the firmness, like an air bed, because you can, pump up the air on one side and lower it on the other side, and then you can fit 2 people.
That's a great kind of algorithm to pick a bed. And how often should someone buy a new bed?
So this is a great question. Lots of people, I'd love to turn to you and say every 6 or 7 years, but your body will tell you when you need a new bed. And it usually comes with stiffness and lower back pain. If you wake up more than 2 times a week, like not after you've gone for a run or a mountain bike ride or whatever it is your thing is, right? But if you've just had a normal night and you wake up stiff and sore, the bed is probably not supporting you the way it should, and it's probably time to get a new bed.
Yeah, that happened to me because I remember for like a year walking around stiff and sore, and I had no idea. I didn't realize it's been like 10 years since I bought a new bed.
Yep.
And then finally someone told me, like, what about your bed?
Yeah, and it's not a fun process, right? I mean, it's not fun to go in there and you're haggling around and you're trying to figure it all out. Like, there's nothing fun about it, which is, I think, one of the reasons why so many of these bed-in-a-box companies have become so popular, because they have one or two models. You just buy it and it shows up at your door and, problem solved type of thing. The problem is that in some cases you might be getting a high quality product. In some cases, unfortunately, you might not be. And consumers don't necessarily know what is or isn't. So I think a lot of it sometimes depends upon where you are in your stage of life as to what kind of bed you want, right? So at age 50, I think I'm less inclined to buy a bed in a box for my main bed. I might buy it for my guest room, right? I might buy it for a kid's bed, right? But I'm probably less inclined to use it because I want to, with my aches and pains, I want to lie on something for a couple of minutes and make sure that my aches and pains go away before I buy a bed.
Exactly.
Can those bed in the boxes be good though?
Absolutely.
They can be as comparable to the ones that you're looking and shopping for, right?
Almost, right? And so there's only so much you can do to compress a product, roll it up and stick it in a box, right? So some of the appeal to some of the higher priced and nicer beds is that those are things that are not compressible, right? And so when you look at, for example, springs, they've recently developed a way to actually compress and roll springs without damaging them, but you have to have a very particular kind of spring. It has to be a certain tensile strength. There's a lot of kind of stuff that goes in with it. Whereas, if you go and lie on, for Simmons, right? A Simmons bed that's fully springed and got all kinds of good stuff in it, if you fold that thing up, you're going to change the structural integrity of the product itself, and then it's not going to do for you what you want it to do, right? So I would argue, and I don't think this is across the board, but just my own personal opinion is I think that the younger you are, the easier it is to have your body sleep on foam. And foam is probably the easiest thing for you to roll it up and stick it in a box and send it over to you. Now, the caveat here is for people with pain syndromes. So people who've got fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, things like that, they actually do quite well on foam. And actually people with disc issues, my wife has 4 torn discs. And so we actually have her on a foam product because it works really well for her and it keeps her in one place. She could actually throw out her back in the middle of the night while she's sleeping. So we have to have it so where she's right there, not moving and comfortable.
So foam beds are good for those types of person, but not necessarily good for just someone who's just looking for a normal, regular, everyday bed.
To be super honest with you, it's unbelievably differentiated. I've got 90-year-old patients who love foam beds, and then I've got 30-year-old patients who would only sleep on a coil bed. Yeah. A lot of it has to do with personal preference, right? Yeah. And getting on it and kind of how does your body fit the bed.
Yeah. So is a water bed good for anybody?
So it's a great question, right? So if you actually looked at what would be the best surface that would be moldable, temperature controlled, and give you the most support, it's water. Okay. But the 70s kind of killed water beds for everybody, right? And nobody wants to maintain them and figure them out any longer. But if somebody decided to come out with a really high-tech upscale water bed, I could tell you now it would probably be incredible on the market.
Oh, that's amazing.
I feel like in general, beds are kind of antiquated. I mean, I think by now we should be sleeping in pods that are totally controlled. You have your entire environment controlled. Right. You got vibrations, you got the sound, you got the lighting are all blacked out. I mean, why don't we have that?
Well, okay, so let's spread the discussion out, not from just the bed or even the pillow or duvet, but to the whole room or the unit, the sleeping unit, if you will, right? So I just got back from a trip from Asia, and in a lot of places there, I mean, this couch, it would be a luxury for them to be able to have this much room to sleep. There's lots of people who can sleep in very small quarters, very controlled quarters and do well. Look at astronauts, right? Perfect example. I mean, they sleep just fine in the space station, right? So I think one of the things we have to always keep in mind is, number one, we're never going to get bedrooms out of the house, right? Everybody's not going to go to their pod and slide in and come back out, the next day. But I do think that there's a lot of things in the bedroom environment that we need to think through. And so what I do is I think of the bedroom environment according to the 5 senses, right? So sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And so then what I try to do is look at all of those, because all of those areas affect sleep. So then what I try to do is have in the bedroom itself things that will hit those senses in a positive way for sleep.
as an example, you could look at lights, right? So light, when it hits the optic nerve, it actually charges these things called melanopsin cells in our eyes, and it turns off the melatonin faucet in our brain. This is why devices at night are so terrible, right? This is why you shouldn't be doing Facebook or playing Candy Crush or even watching Game of Thrones or whatever it is your thing late at night on these devices, because the blue light is basically telling your brain, don't produce melatonin. Well, now they actually make light bulbs for a bedside table, and they actually have filters on the inside of them. And I have them. Neither one of my kids know it, but I have them in both of their bedside table lamps. And then in their bathrooms, I have the opposite. I have extra blue light in their bathroom. So in the mornings when they flick on the switch, it helps wake them up. So I help them go to sleep at night with the bright lighting and wake up with the right lighting. It's actually, I mean, it seems a little like high tech. The light bulbs are only $20, $25 a piece, right? So it's not like this is some thousands and thousands of dollars that you have to go spend. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, you know, we've really screwed up our circadian rhythm with lighting. I mean,
no question.
The amount of light pollution in our life is just nuts. And so like you said, like, you know, the bulbs that you did, that's a great high-tech solution. What are other things, like what's your like list of the top 5 things you can do about lighting?
Sure. So a couple of things that I think people can do. If you want to control your lights, buy an eye mask, right? It's super simple, right? If somebody likes to watch television to fall asleep and you don't, wear that eye mask and that light won't bother you. Blackout shades are incredibly helpful, especially if you live in an area that's super sunny. I used to live in Arizona. It's like the valley of the sun, right? I mean, you know, super sunny. So blackout curtains were a must there. Having this biological lighting was certainly helpful for us and our family. And then really trying to limit the amount of time that you spend on electronic devices before bed. Now, I've got 2 teenagers. Okay, so limiting time on devices before bed is like the struggle of all struggles at my house, right? So actually I have them wearing blue blocker glasses. So many people might remember these. Back in the 70s, there was a song called Blue Blockers, but they're actually, their lenses will filter the blue light, the wavelength of blue light, 450 to 480 nanometers. It actually filters 98% of that out, so it doesn't hit those melanopsin cells. And so my kids can actually, with their melatonin, you know, helpful light bulbs, put on their blue blocker glasses, and they can do work. They can watch TV or watch on their computer and, you know, fall asleep, you know, 30 minutes later, and it doesn't have a big effect.
Love it. Okay. So we covered sight. Let's talk about sound.
Sound's a big one. So when you think about sound, believe it or not, there are certain sounds that help lull the body to sleep. The biggest one are ocean sounds. The crashing of the waves actually happens in roughly a 60 cycle. And so that's something that's very settling to the brain. Ocean sounds have been shown to help people fall asleep and actually have deeper sleep. There's a good bit of data now on something called binaural beats, right? So this is where one sound comes in through one headphone and then a slightly different sound comes in through the other headphone. And the idea is that your brain tunes in between the two of them. And that middle range of tuning is less activity than being awake, right? So what happens is let's say that your waveforms when you're awake are what are called alpha waveforms. And so when somebody sends a signal in here, they send a signal in that's not alpha, that's below alpha. And so then your brain goes lower than alpha and lower and lower. And so that's the theory behind binaural beats. There's good data and not good data out there. Nobody's really done this fantastic clinical trial on binaural beats. But here's what I can tell you. I got plenty of patients who love them. Okay, I got some patients that just don't work for it.
And you're sleeping with the binaural beats all night.
Well, so everybody was asked that, like, do you wear the earphones, or, you know, what about your ear canal? If you're wearing, iPod or whatever those called, earbuds. Believe it or not, they make these things called pillow speakers. Okay, and everybody's like, pillow speakers? Like, just go to Radio Shack for like $5. It's a little speaker. It goes inside your pillow. There's a little cord that goes, and it'll click right into your, MP3 or iPhone or whatever. And you can listen to anything you want. And it doesn't bother your neighbor, which is great. And it allows you to get to sleep naturally.
That's amazing. And what about white noise?
I'm a big fan of white noise, but actually we've changed kind of from white to more pink and what's called brown noise. So white noise was the entire spectrum is open, and you just get this huge mass of data that comes into your ears. Pink noise actually took out the high highs and the low lows, so it's a little bit easier for the ear to hear. There's something new called brown noise, which they're shrinking this kind of waveform a little bit smaller, and they think it might have some pretty positive effects on health as well. But right now, if people are looking, pink noise is something. I work with a company called iHome, and we have a great sound machine, which also has meditations. It has it teaches people progressive muscle relaxation. It's got special lighting. It's got sounds. It's kind of like this all in one little unit. It's pretty cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I've seen apps with pink noise on it, so now I finally know what that is. I just thought it was something made up.
Yeah, nope, there's a real thing.
Good. Go ahead.
So you feel that people should be sleeping with a noise all night long, or do you promote that?
Well, here's what's fascinating is the quieter it is, the more acute your hearing becomes. Mm-hmm. And so you start to hear stuff, right? And so, look, I'll tell you the story. So my wife told me when we first met, by the way, Michael, I sleep with the television on. And I was like, don't worry about that, hon. I'm a sleep doctor. I'm going to fix that. Okay, I don't know if anybody out there has tried to fix something before in their partner.
Especially on your wife.
Yeah. Didn't go over very well. But here's what I learned is she doesn't really watch television to go to bed. She listens, right? And I call it listening out of the corner of her ear because her eyes are closed and it's because here's what she tells me, and many of my patients have told me the same thing, is the biggest problem with insomnia is they can't turn off their brain. Right? It's just this going of thoughts from the day, making lists. Did I do this right? What have I got to do tomorrow? All that kind of stuff. What's nice about having some form of noise is it's distracting, right? You're listening to the music. If you're a music person, I would say you probably want to stay away from heavy metal, before bed. I think you'd probably want to have music without lyrics would probably be the best type of stuff, because then you wake up with the song in your head and you can never get rid of it, and it's such a pain. But again, nature sounds, ocean sounds, but having some form of noise as opposed to total silence, I would argue is actually better for sleep.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel that I sleep way better when I have white noise going, but I don't, if someone else has a TV on or music, it completely distracts me from being able to sleep.
Right.
But when it almost creates the environment of being kind of in a cocoon, when I have white noise on, it's almost like it wraps you up in this noise, and I just feel like I can go into much deeper of a sleep with it.
Yeah, and so here's what's interesting is if you look at specific tones, like white noise or pink noise, there is some data to suggest that not only do people fall asleep faster, but they get to deeper sleep quicker. So that might be what you're experiencing, is just that getting to that stage 3, 4 sleep faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the same experience. White sleep, best sleep ever. Without any noise, I definitely wake up when the slightest sound I can hear. So, okay, let's talk about aromatherapy.
Absolutely, I'm a big fan.
You are, okay.
I am. So there's 2 clinical trials that were done, double-blind placebo-controlled studies looking at aroma for sleep. Now, let's be very clear. You don't just sniff something and pass out, okay, unless it's like ether, right, or something along those lines, right? But what the aroma does is it actually causes a relaxation response in the musculature. And that relaxation response, because people are usually pretty sleep deprived, allows them to get to sleep. So don't be fooled that aromatherapy is making you sleepy, but it's not a bad thing. Aromatherapy is making you relaxed enough to go to bed. But the key thing that I always tell people here is you really want to be careful with the form factor of the aromatherapy, right? Because most aromatherapy comes in candles, and fire and sleep don't mix, right? So you really want to have like a pillow spray or a diffuser or some bedside unit that can release whatever the smell is. There's only 2 smells that I've seen any clinical data on. One is lavender, and the other is something called ylang ylang.
Yep.
Those are the 2.
Yeah, there's a store here called Sage that makes amazing diffusers that work really well. Right, exactly. So Lang Lang and also lavender, the 2 phrases. Got it.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about? I think we talked about temperature, so we got that.
Which would be the touch.
Right, and then taste.
Yeah, absolutely. So people are like, what does taste have to do with it? Well, let's think about it. There are a lot of myths out there about food and sleep. Right. Biggest one is turkey. And everybody says, if I eat turkey and I have a turkey sandwich, it's going to make me sleepy. You'd have to eat a 23-pound turkey to get enough tryptophan to actually make you sleepy. And tryptophan doesn't work particularly well in the presence of protein. So even in your best college days when you probably could eat a 23-pound turkey, all you're going to do is get sick. Right? It's not going to do you a whole lot of good. The reason that you sleep better after Thanksgiving is because you've been so nervous about your relatives showing up and your in-laws driving you crazy that when they're gone, all you want to do is sleep. The other big one is milk, right? Warm milk. Does warm milk make me tired? Because it also has tryptophan in it. Again, 1.5 gallons of warm milk is what you'd have to ingest to get enough tryptophan. I mean, that's disgusting, right? So, but here's the reason why warm milk actually works is Who gave you the warm milk when you were a child?
Mom did.
Exactly. And what does that bring back? That brings back this great association of somebody that cared for you, that loved you, that helped lower your anxiety. The theme here, it's all about anxiety. Okay, 75% of my insomniacs have raging anxiety, and that's really what we're affecting. Is we're teaching them different techniques not to exacerbate their anxiety, and then teach them techniques to get more and more relaxed to allow them to fall asleep naturally.
Got it. That's really profound. Anxiety and sleep disorders and insomnia are very closely interrelated.
I would say roughly 75% of my insomnia patients have either anxiety or depression as a major component, and then the other 25% is either environmental or medical or medicinal, right? So a medical situation like pain, right? Or they're taking a medicine that causes some level of insomnia. Adderall or what have you, ADD stuff.
Right. Very interesting. Any supplements that you use? We talked a little about tryptophan, we talked about melatonin.
Yeah.
I like melatonin for like maybe a few weeks of trying to get better sleep, but I've seen it be completely ineffective after about a couple of months or so. What do you think about all of them?
So I'll get on my soapbox for just a second about melatonin here.
All right.
So melatonin is not regulated by the FDA, which means I can make it in my garage and I can sell it at the local health food store, and that's a perfectly legal thing to do. So that's number one. Number two, 95% of the melatonin that's currently sold is sold in an overdosage format. If you look at the data out of MIT, between 0.5 and 1.5 milligrams is the appropriate dose for melatonin. Okay, and I've seen it in 3s, 5s, 10s, right? And what happens is people say, well, 1 didn't work, I'll take 2, and 2 didn't work, and I'll take 3. Here's the thing, melatonin is not a sleep initiator, it's a sleep regulator. Okay, melatonin doesn't make you sleepy. It tells your brain it's time for bed. While that sounds similar, those are two completely different things. So remember how I talked about the drive and the rhythm? Melatonin only affects the rhythm. So everybody's had this experience before. You ever lie down in bed, physically exhausted, and you can't sleep? Right? That's because your circadian rhythm is telling you it's not time to sleep. Right? So everybody knows what that's like. That's a lot of times what melatonin does. And so a lot of people take melatonin inappropriately. Now, I will tell you, again, I'm 50 years old. Right around age 50 is where I'm starting to see it makes sense because of that decline, that natural decline in melatonin. Melatonin supplementation makes sense to me at age 50 and on. Again, do the blood test, figure out if you're low, blah, blah, blah. Magnesium turns out to be the biggest. Right? Everybody out there is likely deficient in magnesium, okay? You could eat a bushel of kale and still not get the amount of magnesium that you need, right? Because our bodies don't produce it, we have to eat it, number one. And most of the soil that our vegetables is grown in has been tilled so much and hasn't had a chance to rest that there's no trace minerals left in those things. So they're not coming up through into the plant, which we would then ingest and have in our system. So magnesium supplementation is something I highly recommend in the evenings for most people, and it can actually be quite sedating in many cases. And so one of the first things I do with my patients, especially if they're kind of my age or older, is I might start them on a melatonin supplement at a very particular pace for a certain period of time. And by the way, if you ingest it in a pill form, it takes almost 90 minutes for it to get from here to here. So you don't take it right before bed like you would a sleeping pill, which is the other reason why so many people find it to be ineffective. Is because like I took it and I was lying in bed for an hour and a half before I fell asleep. Well, that's kind of exactly how it's supposed to work. Take it 90 minutes before bed, take the right dose, and it can be very helpful for things like jet lag. Right? Or what we call social jet lag. So this is kind of an interesting phenomenon where you stay up late Friday, sleep in on Saturday, stay up late Saturday, sleep in on Sunday. Guess what happens Sunday night? It's called Sunday night insomnia, right? It's all because you've rotated your internal biological clock. We can fix that with melatonin very easily on Sunday evenings and get you right as rain.
Got it.
So melatonin and magnesium are two of the big ones that I like. I like 5-HTP quite a bit. It's part of the process of how the body actually creates melatonin. So I think that can be useful as well. Personally, I really also like L-theanine because while it doesn't necessarily affect sleep, it almost immediately calms you down.
Yeah.
And I like that, having that before bed. I think that can be very, very helpful. Other anxiolytics or herbs that will reduce anxiety before bed are things like magnolia bark and jujubaside. Those are two ones that aren't as well known, but are super duper effective in certain ways for sleep.
And Dr. Breus, you're going to put these together in a stack, right? Like a combo.
They're going to be available here.
Great.
We're going to put them in a drip. here.
Great.
We're going to make a stack. We're going to do all kinds of
Like a
good stuff.
sleep trip. I love it.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic. So what about Ambien and Lunesta? What about those sleep drugs? Tell us a little bit about your feelings about those.
So here's the thing, is there is absolutely, positively a place for pharmaceuticals in the world of sleep, okay? Let me tell you something. They're good drugs and they work well and they put people to sleep. Here's the problem is when we look at the old school sleep drugs, the benzodiazepines, right? So the Xanaxes, the Valiums, the Restorils of the world, those were anti-anxiety medications that happen to make people sleepy, okay? But by the way, they're super addictive, right? Then you move on to what are called the Z drugs. So that's Zolpidem and so which the trade names are Ambien, Sonata, Lunesta. Okay, those are the newer kind of technology of drugs. While they don't have as high an addictive potential, here's the problem. If you don't sleep well for 10 years and I hand you a pill and you sleep like a stone, you're going to want that pill again and again. It doesn't matter if you're physiologically addicted to it, the psychological implications are tremendous. I believe that we should use pharmaceuticals to break the cycle of insomnia and then teach people how to sleep on their own and then slowly taper them off of those pharmaceuticals. There's very few people out there that have what I call a broken sleeper, right? That mechanism in their head is completely kaput, right? Most people can sleep if we can get them into the right environment, the right state of mind, and get their body right. We can usually get them there,
Sure.
right? But I think we just have to be a little bit more conservative in the prescriptive use of sleeping pills these days. Because here's what eventually happens: is you go to see your normal GP. And you've got a grand total of 15 minutes with them, and you're talking about your blood pressure or diabetes, and it's called the doorknob diagnosis. As the doctor is reaching for the door to leave, the patient says, "Oh, and by the way, I don't sleep so well." And so what do? They don't have the time. They pull out their prescription pad and they write a prescription for something. They say, "Take this for 30 days, you'll be fine." I would argue that that's irresponsible in certain ways. I would argue that what you need to do is, if you're going to give somebody a plan to use a sleep aid, which by the way, there are plenty of instances where a sleep aid is appropriate. Cancer, pain, major mental health issues like bipolar, schizophrenia. I mean, there's lots and lots of reasons why you would want to use these drugs. Be responsible. Give your patient an idea of how long they're going to be on these medications. Teach them how to taper off it, and bring them to a clinical psychologist or somebody like me who's understands cognitive behavioral therapy and can lead them to the path of being able to sleep on their own, right? I think what we really need is MDs and PhDs working together to be able to solve these issues.
Oh, that's so profound, because I know so many people with insomnia, and it does take a multidisciplinary approach to this.
No question.
Not just a prescription for Ambien. That's I've seen that lead to disaster.
Yes, many times. So super quick.
Yeah.
So what we know is that snoring is a reduction in airflow, right? And so when you're breathing in, your airway becomes somewhat compromised. Maybe that's because your jaw is displaced back. Maybe it's because you have over a 17-inch neck. By the way, for all the guys out there, anybody who has over a 17.5-inch neck has an 82% chance of having sleep apnea. It's the largest physical marker in all of medicine. It's ridiculous. I could stand outside the Big and Tall shop and just pass out my card, and probably be in great shape. But what we're looking for here is a bed partner's report of somebody stopping breathing. Okay, so generally speaking, stopping breathing is not good, right? I mean, we like our patients to breathe, right? And what happens is the throat becomes more relaxed, and then maybe there's big tonsils in the way, so the airway becomes more compromised. And then also when you suck air in, boom, it closes, okay? Now, believe it or not, the closing of the airway isn't the worst part of this whole scenario. So when your airway is closed, your diaphragm is still working. And so it's still trying to pull air, right? So what happens is it actually sucks air down, and then all of a sudden your brain is like, hold on a second, there's no, and so your heart rate slows, okay, because your heart rate slows to conserve the oxygen that's in the system, because it doesn't want to distribute all the air because it knows there's no more air coming in, right? Then all of a sudden your brain says, holy crap, there's no air here, and it wakes you up. And so what happens is your heart rate slows down, and then to wake you up, it has to speed up. So it slows down, speeds up, slows down, speeds up. It puts an extra load on your heart, right? And it can actually increase cardiac muscle. Now, of all the muscles in your body that we like to get bigger, cardiac isn't necessarily one of them, okay? Because when it gets bigger unevenly, guess what? You have an irregular heartbeat. And one of the leading irregular heartbeats from sleep apnea is atrial fibrillation, which can lead to all kinds of major problems and is incredibly difficult to control. Also, hypertension that does not work well with medications is almost always a direct relation of sleep apnea.
Yeah.
And if you've got high blood pressure and I test your sleep and you've got apnea and I fix your sleep apnea, you can almost kiss that blood pressure medication goodbye because it gets so much better. So for the symptomatology for people to notice is, does your bed partner snore? Have you ever heard them stop breathing in their sleep? And for you to notice if you think you might have it, have you ever woken up gasping or choking even once? You wake up gasping or choking even once, there's a reasonable likelihood you could have sleep apnea because a lot of times it happens silently and we don't even know it's going on. Every single patient that I diagnose with apnea says, what are you talking about? I sleep fine, right? They don't sleep fine. They wake up and they're unrefreshed. They have headaches in the morning from their oxygen deprivation. There's always depression going on, and it can really make a mess of a life.
Yeah, it's a pretty severe diagnosis. Fixing it is life-changing.
Yeah, and it's relatively easy.
Right. Right.
Yeah, there's multiple treatment modalities for fixing sleep apnea.
Right. I mean, and a lot of people are scared of being diagnosed with sleep apnea because they don't want to get a CPAP machine at home.
Right,
but there's a lot of new stuff, right?
There's a ton of new stuff. So first of all, CPAPs aren't that bad.
Right.
I've slept with a CPAP before. Because I wanted to, if I was going to make my patients try it, I better try it myself. It took me the better part of 7 to 10 days to get used to sleeping with it on my face, but then I was able to sleep with it no problem. So people say it's not sexy. Well, I'll tell you what's not sexy is falling asleep during sex. That's not sexy, okay? And that's what happens when people with sleep apnea because they're so damn tired, right? Here's what a CPAP machine does. It's like a hairdryer blowing up your nose, right? So it's just a little air compressor that pushes air through a tube, and when it hits that area that's collapsed, it just ever so slightly opens it up. Puts air straight to the lungs, allows you to sleep. I know it sounds very barbaric and rudimentary, and it is, okay? But it works 99% of the time. Right? So for a lot of my super stubborn sleep apnea patients, I'll at least start them on CPAP and then we look for other solutions. But there are lots of other solutions where you don't even have to use CPAP. There are now mouth guards that will pull the jaw slightly forward, just a millimeter or two, and open up the posterior airway space. There's some great new surgical interventions. It used to be that apnea surgery was the worst, right? It had a 50% success rate and it was terrible and super painful. I had one patient tell me it was like swallowing a golf ball covered with razor blades. That's how they described it. Okay.
I've done that surgery before. You basically empty out all the tissue in the back of the throat.
It's
it
a
takes
rotary,
forever to heal.
Right?
Exactly.
So, pull it all out. Well, so here's what they're doing over at UCLA now, which is pretty fascinating. So what they do is they do a little anesthetic and they put you to sleep in the waiting room, or not the waiting room, but in the like a surgery suite. And they snake a camera up your nose and they hang it down over your palate, and then they watch and they wait to see where the collapse occurs and where they need to. So it's a target picker. And the recovery rates have been astronomical compared to what the old surgeries used to be. The old UPPP, which is what you're describing, it's like a thing of the past now. People are now really zooming in and getting to the right spot.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Wow. What a great amount of information. I'm so sad that we're out of time, but what an
I'll be back, don't worry.
Yeah, we'll definitely need to have you on the show again.
Of course.
This was a beautiful kind of overview of sleep, and I know you have so much more in your head that you can share with us. But we're going to go do a forefront talk with you now at this space where you're going to be able to speak to an audience, about 100 people about sleep, so I can't wait to do that with you. Where do people listening to this podcast find you?
So I'm super easy to find. My website is very easy to remember. It's thesleepdoctor.com. You can't forget it.
Perfect. And won't forget that. Thank you so much, Dr. Breus, for being on the Forefront Show. And
thanks for having me.
We look forward to seeing you here again.
Absolutely.